Hello, Russell Goodman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain here, with a word about today's program, Trading Partner SLAs, Managing 10 Compliance Risks. You know, being able to consistently meet EDI SLA requirements protects more than just your revenue streams. It also guarantees the reputation of your business, and it reduces the risk of non-compliance penalties. But as the number of trading partners and transaction volumes grow, maintaining SLA compliance can truly be challenging. Well, clearly, compliance depends on making good decisions about automation, optimization, and visibility mechanisms. All right. Today we've lined up some leading integration experts to walk us through just how accuracy, availability, responsiveness, change turnaround, and other factors call for a range of compliance and technology strategies. Well, here's what's in store for you today. You'll learn which trading partner onboarding strategies cut time to value, how to design B2B processes to meet tight response windows. You're going to see how to ensure that business-critical partner-facing systems remain available, how to design B2B processes for management by exception, and finally, we'll find out how the right kinds of automation can improve the quality and responsiveness of human interactions. Well, here's who we have on tap for you today. Jim O'Leary, Vice President, Product Strategy, EXTOL International. Jim is an expert on strategic business and IT project planning. He has more than 20 years of senior and executive management experience with software companies. He holds a deep understanding of current technological drivers across multiple industries. Also, Jeff Enns, Vice President, Product Infrastructure at EXTOL International. Jeff holds more than 20 years of experience as an expert problem solver, able to identify productivity issues by analyzing processes and technical capabilities. All right. During the presentation of our experts, they will be taking a poll. And some are going to be some very, very interesting questions for you. So please look for that during the webcast and submit your response to those poll questions. Jim and Jeff will share the results with you in real time. Now, following the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. That's where you get to ask questions of them. So send in your questions during the program. They're going to answer as many of them as they possibly can during the program at the conclusion of the webcast. If they run out of time, they will answer all of your questions offline. So follow the directions on your screen to send in your questions, please. All right, now to our program. We're going to hear first from Jim O'Leary. Jim, welcome. Well, clearly we're having some technical issues getting Jim on the webcast here. We're endeavoring to work that out best we can. Just hold on, please.
Russell, I'm with you now.
Jim. All right,
okay,
very
sorry
good. We got it worked. All right, take it away.
All right. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so thanks for joining us today. I just want to take a couple of seconds to introduce the material in terms of not what we have in store, but sort of putting things in perspective just to get us started. So the first thing to say is that meeting targeted service levels is an important goal for electronic data interchange. That's kind of an obvious statement because the accuracy and timeliness of EDI results has a big impact on dependent business activities. So for example, in supply-side businesses, those activities are things like filling orders and shipping product and generating invoices. And because SLA compliance is also a common basis for vendor scoring and penalty determination, it's important to both supply-side companies and demand-side companies. So with 10 SLA compliance factors to cover, Jeff and I will be covering a lot of ground in this presentation. And if you're evaluating EDI solutions or services, you can use this material to build a checklist of compliance features to look for. And if you already have a suitable EDI solution, you can use our framework to evaluate and improve compliance measures in your business. By the way, if you're outsourcing EDI to a third party, you still need to understand and verify EDI service level compliance. It's really not something that you can outsource completely. A competent EDI service provider will take reasonable measures to comply with known service levels, but they might not do that in a way that meets your requirements or those of your trading partners. So it's really important to ask questions about how your provider plans to maintain SLA compliance. Okay, with that quick introduction, let's move forward and look at a quick definition of service level compliance. So service level agreements establish objective criteria for assessing EDI performance. And on the buy side of your business, you're measuring service levels for vendors that provide goods and services. And on the sell side, you're measuring your own service levels to ensure that your business's compliance with SLAs, that your business is compliant with SLAs established by your customers. The overall goal of compliance is to meet or exceed trading partner and internal expectations for EDI performance. And those expectations can be expressed in multiple ways. SLAs aren't always formally written down in advance. There are verbal commitments, for example, that can also be important to satisfying trading partners. So it's important to note that compliance with documented service levels may not fully satisfy trading partner expectations. SLA compliance can be measured along a number of dimensions, including how consistently accurate and complete transmitted EDI data is, how consistently and promptly EDI data is acknowledged and responded to, which is very important in trucking, healthcare, and other industries where response time can win or lose business or determine exposure to penalties. How available and dependable your business's EDI service is. This factor is particularly important for multinationals and other businesses that operate 24/7. And how long it takes to onboard new trading partners and provision transactions and changes. These are just a few of the factors that we'll be considering through the course of this webinar. Okay, let's move ahead and look at the three key issues that Jeff and I will be examining for the rest of the webinar. So our main focus will be on 10 operational and lifecycle factors that dominate SLA compliance. Again, we'll be looking strictly at EDI SLAs, not at SLA compliance for order fill rates or on-time shipment or other non-EDI metrics. And for each of the 10 factors that we examine, we'll suggest some best practices for reducing compliance risk and explain how they contribute to other business benefits as well. And finally, we'll consider where technology is best suited to minimize compliance risk and where there's no substitute for human involvement. As a technology vendor, EXTOL has a definite bias toward automating as much as possible, but we also recognize that establishing and interpreting and managing SLAs are human-centric activities. Now, speaking of EXTOL, before we get into the core of our presentation, let me just take 30 seconds to introduce you to our credentials for this discussion. EXTOL provides integration software and services for EDI and other forms of business integration. We're privately held and directly support our customers from our headquarters in Pennsylvania in the U.S. We serve customers in many industries, including the ones that you see here, transportation, distribution, logistics, and others. And our EXTOL Business Integrator offering is available as a middleware solution for self-managed EDI and as an EDI as a service offering for companies that prefer to outsource EDI. Customers use our software and services to integrate external trading partners with enterprise applications and data and with cloud applications and services. Now, there are just a few things I want to call attention to that make us different from our competitors. The first is our flagship business integrator solution, which I mentioned just a second ago, which is not just available as a product and as a service, but also supports B2B integration, application integration, data and services integration, and offers licensing, deployment, implementation, and management options to meet a wide range of business needs. Second is our focus on time to value and total cost of ownership. Most of our customers are mid-sized businesses with extremely thin IT staff, so the focus of our product strategy is on productivity and ease of use, and again, time to value without sacrificing power. And last but not least is our acclaimed customer service and support, which again is staffed in our U.S. headquarters. We really take pride in providing personalized one-on-one support and going above and beyond expectations. It's really one of the biggest reasons that companies choose EXTOL. Okay, with that quick introduction to our qualifications on today's topic, let's take a look at the 10 compliance risk factors that Jeff and I will be covering. So this diagram is the main context that Jeff and I will be using for our compliance discussion. And at the top we see trading partners and other possible integration points that lie outside your business, including cloud-based applications. At the bottom are applications and data that reside on-premise. And in the middle you see EDI middleware and tools that integrate trading partners at the top with application and data resources at the top and the bottom. The 10 factors we'll be focusing on range from communication and data quality. Oh, excuse me 1 second. Let's go back here. All right, so the 10 factors we'll be focusing on range from communication and data quality to work prioritization, process automation, provisioning, change control and visibility, and even the scalability and availability of the EDI system itself. And I want to take note here that the layer of middleware and tools at the center of the diagram could either reside on-premise or in the cloud, or even be distributed, and that the users of that EDI system might be company personnel or external service providers, for example, EXTOL. The risk factors that affect the areas shown on the diagram are relevant regardless of the approach that you choose or how you choose to deploy the EDI solution. Okay, you saw a sneak peek of the poll that we want to go to next, so before we dive into the material, we'd like to ask you something about how you manage SLA compliance today. So let's please, if we would, take a second to answer the first poll question here. And the question is, which of the following SLA compliance actions have you already taken in your business? And you can check more than one of these if they apply to you. So is there a person in your organization who's accountable for SLA compliance? Do you have a written compliance policy? Do you monitor and report on compliance exceptions? Do you seek out opportunities to automate compliance? Or perhaps your compliance approach is informal and undocumented, in which case it's none of the above. So we'll give you just a minute here to answer the question. Looks like a few of you have answered. Let's just give 10 or 15 seconds more. Okay. Looks like just about everybody who wants to answer has answered. So let's move forward and take a look at the results here. So that's interesting and very, very encouraging. 72% of you responded that you monitor and report exceptions against baseline compliance metrics. That's very encouraging. The fact that you're measuring compliance at all puts you probably in the minority. So that's, again, very encouraging. A majority of you also answered that you continuously evaluate opportunities to automate compliance. Again, very encouraging and more on the leading edge than not. And then the third most popular answer was that you have created a written policy with compliance metrics. Again, good practices there. So very interesting and very encouraging results. All right, let's move forward and start taking a look at the compliance risk factors. And we're going to start with actually a set of 3 areas that are Probably areas, especially considering the way you just answered the poll question, areas you've already got covered pretty well. But I'm going to cover them anyway for the main reason that not all of you are probably managing EDI on your own, and some of these can be really important trip points if you're outsourcing EDI. So let's start with data completeness and accuracy. This is a simplified version of the context diagram we saw earlier. And the first problem we'll consider is that validation of data, the checks that determine whether inbound and outbound data is accurate and complete, can occur in multiple areas. Actually, it does occur in multiple areas. For example, when EDI is received from a trading partner, the EDI middleware determines whether it conforms to the agreed EDI standard, for example, EXTOL or EDIFACT, and the middleware rejects data that doesn't conform to the standard. And of course, there are multiple checks that are go beyond simply determining whether it meets the standard. But there are additional checks needed to determine whether the data also conforms to the requirements of the target application. And in this case, it's an ERP system at the bottom of the diagram. So if those checks don't occur until after the EDI middleware passes the data onward, we now have two sets of rejected data that we need to monitor in two different locations. And that adds to the number of steps that we need to take to identify and diagnose validation errors, and increases the opportunity for manual errors. And it adds to the time also needed to resolve questions and complaints from trading partners who think they've sent us good data but actually haven't. And this situation, again, is especially common with EDI outsourcing because basic validation checks for EDI compliance probably occur, but additional checks for application level requirements may not, unless you ask for them explicitly. So the overall result of this arrangement is higher end-to-end latency, meaning that the time between the receipt of EDI data and successful processing of all data increases on average due to the extra time needed to diagnose and resolve exceptions. And we'll talk more about how that works in a second. It also increases operating costs from the partner, and from the partner's perspective, unpredictable response timeframes, and again, that can lead to penalties. So managing this risk requires consolidating EDI and application validation in one place. Let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so by performing both EDI and application level validation in the EDI middleware layer, you now have one place to look for and resolve most kinds of data errors. And that makes it possible to automate notifications for both kinds of errors using EDI level acknowledgements and application level responses. Centralizing error detection and diagnosis also simplifies exception processing and leads to faster error resolution for trading partner, resolution rather, of trading partner questions and disputes. So the overall result is fewer manual errors and delays, lower operating costs, and from the trading partner's perspective, more predictable response and fewer reasons to impose performance penalties. So centralizing error management is important, but by itself, it doesn't make individual errors easy to locate and resolve. So let's move on and take a look at our second risk factor area at ways to reduce the risk of missed exceptions. Okay, so ideally, we want to spend time resolving exceptions flagged by the EDI system without getting distracted by the noise of other EDI activity. And what makes that challenging is the volume of information that and warning messages that can get generated by the EDI system. It's not just rejected data that we need to resolve, it's also communication exceptions, file, database, and application access issues, and other unexpected processing exceptions. Diagnosing not just the nature of each exception, but also its location and cause can be difficult and time-consuming without effective tools. And once we understand the location and cause of an exception, we need to resolve it. And that might involve simply retrying a failed communication step, but it also might involve going back to the partner or application data source and resolving a data quality issue, then reprocessing the correct data. So isolating and reprocessing only the data that failed is the best way to avoid transaction duplication problems downstream, which can be very time-consuming without adequate capabilities in the EDI middleware for reprocessing and resending. And a delay in any of these steps, exception detection, diagnosis, and resolution, increases operating costs, unpredictability, and the chance of disrupting downstream business. And of course, again, that could lead to penalties. So let's take a look at some best practices for avoiding these compliance risks. Okay, so exception handling capabilities are essential to EDI operations. So every solution provides some way to identify and diagnose and resolve exceptions, but how well they deal with different kinds of exceptions determines how much time you need to spend in exception handling activities. The first and, in some ways, most important step to take in managing exceptions is configuring error notifications. The EDI middleware should provide the ability to select for the kinds of errors that you want to be notified about, and then issue notifications that include enough information to locate and diagnose each exception. Notifications usually occur through email, through exception handling processes that, for example, might post entries to a trouble ticket system, through a dashboard or a console, or sometimes through a combination of those three mechanisms. And the key is to manage the exceptions, not your entire workload. So after detection, the next step is diagnosis, and all EDI solutions, again, provide logging data for diagnosing exceptions. But what's needed for rapid diagnosis is the ability to easily filter and drill down on log data for both processes and data exceptions. There are many ways to do this, both well and poorly, so it's a best practice to walk through the steps that you need to perform in order to diagnose a variety of data and processing exceptions before you choose an EDI solution. Now, as I mentioned on the last slide, the best way to avoid transaction duplication problems downstream when resolving exceptions is to isolate and reprocess or resend only the data that was not processed successfully. So whether you outsource EDI or manage it internally, be sure that your solution can reprocess and resend data at multiple enveloping levels. And the overall result of putting these best practices in place is faster resolution and response, lower operating costs, and avoidance of downstream business disruptions and penalties, which is, of course, the most important part. So let's wrap up our error management discussion with one more factor, or one more risk factor, and take a quick look at managing acknowledgements and responses. All right, so EDI acknowledgements notify trading partners when errors are detected and when they're not detected in inbound data. This error notification can occur at a couple of levels: EDI errors and application data errors, and the first level is frequently required by many trading partners. Sometimes the application level responses are also required. There are a few potential problems with acknowledgements that impact SLA compliance if not managed, and the first is failing to send outbound acknowledgements on time in response to inbound EDI. This can occur, for example, if inbound processing fails before reaching the acknowledgement step. If the outbound acknowledgement isn't sent, your trading partner has no information about what happened to the data they sent you. A second problem is sort of the opposite when acknowledgements to data that you sent to a trading partner are missing. So an inbound acknowledgement might be missing because the partner never sent it, or because you received it but you can't locate it. A third problem is a variation on the second. There's no universal rule governing how quickly acknowledgements must be received. You might send EDI data to 10 different trading partners and receive acknowledgements from them on 10 different intervals. But if your service level agreement with a given partner stipulates a time limit for acknowledging receipt, or if you have enough trading history with that partner so that you have a basis for determining when an acknowledgement is late, then there are methods to detect missing acknowledgements. And unmanaged problems with acknowledgements and responses are risks to compliance, not just because they may violate SLA terms, but because they can delay and disrupt downstream business activities like, again, filling orders, dispatching service, sending invoices, and other activities. So let's take a quick look at how we can manage these problems. Managing the acknowledgement problems we just saw isn't really difficult with the right practices and EDI middleware capabilities. And the first one, avoiding missing outbound acknowledgements, can be as simple as generating outbound acknowledgements as part of the inbound receipt process. Decoupling those two activities can lead to problems. And late acknowledgements can mostly be avoided by processing inbound EDI within a window expected by your trading partner, using events and time schedules to trigger inbound processing, for example. The second problem, missing inbound acknowledgements, they're easier to manage with automated reconciliation. That means that if you've received an acknowledgement, you can always locate it because it's linked to the outbound data that it belongs to. If your EDI system automatically reconciles outbound data with inbound acknowledgements, then you can know for sure whether an expected acknowledgement is missing or perhaps it's just late. So finally, on the late acknowledgements, you can detect those by simply filtering log data for unreconciled outbound transmissions that are beyond a given age. Your EDI system should be able to do that for you. So adopting those 3 best practices I just described resolves most problems with acknowledgements and responses. The remaining cases surface as part of the exception handling activities that I discussed earlier. And together, these best practices reduce the risk of acknowledgement-related compliance problems and preserve the efficiency benefits of automated bidirectional data communication with trading partners. What I've covered so far, again, is probably already well understood. If you're an EDI practitioner, you understand these things. But again, it doesn't mean that they're safely under control. It's always a best practice to verify that your EDI middleware or solution provider manages those problems to your satisfaction, no matter how well understood the problems are, again, in a way that meets required service levels. Okay, let me turn the floor over to Jeff to talk about how to manage 2 more compliance risks. Jeff?
Hey, thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody, and thanks again for joining us today. In organizations where EDI middleware has been implemented, oftentimes gaps in automated processing occur for non-EDI documents, such as proprietary flat files, spreadsheets, or XML documents. Dealing with these one-off documents manually can result in a variety of challenges to SLA compliancy. Manual processes naturally rely on people who can at times be unavailable due to normal business or personal activities such as vacations and meetings or sickness, those kinds of things. Manual processes also require manual data entry and multi-step data acceptances. These practices are tedious and typically error-prone and, relatively speaking, slow and inefficient. As errors are discovered by downstream processes, the error correction and rework loop contains the same manual challenges and difficulties as the original document, which continues to perpetuate latency issues. As upstream processes lag, a ripple effect is felt by dependent processes and can lead to either late or missed fulfillment and the accompanying chargebacks or negative scorecard ratings that come with it. Process latency caused by errors and resource availability increase the likelihood of unmet SLAs and other compliancy risks. When EDI and non-EDI data is managed and automated through the same EDI middleware, manual processing can be significantly reduced or eliminated altogether. Status visibility to trading partners and to internal teams can be increased, reducing latency challenges even further. Your valuable human resources can then focus on lower occurrence, higher priority exceptions that require high-level skills to diagnose and fix. Automating end-to-end integration facilitates the efficient fulfillment of downstream processes and helps to ensure delivery schedules are preserved. By managing the process latency, SLAs can continue to be met or exceeded by reducing manual errors and focusing resources on exceptions and automating tedious tasks. Visibility to transaction status and results is key to understanding troubleshooting and verifying operational state. Without their own visibility into their transactions with you, a customer or partner is forced to pick up the phone and place a time-consuming call into support centers. And without appropriate visibility into relevant transaction state or information, the CSRs are forced then to place their own call with internal IT departments, consuming more time and delaying time-critical responses. This person-to-person-to-person communication risks SLA compliance by being forced to use these time-consuming methods for routine tasks that naturally lead to miscommunication, latency, and unpredictable responses. However, with direct visibility into status and results, information can be provided on demand or even proactively to partners. Combining relevant notifications and critical alerts with instant lookup capabilities places control in the hands of the decision makers. Distributing status and results visibility out to customers and customer services allows IT resources to focus on new business, partner onboarding, and critical maintenance tasks. It will also reduce the overall support burden of your highly skilled IT resources. SLA benefits then are realized through visibility by providing current and accurate information to end users when they need it. Through alerts, notifications, and lookup portals, CSRs can provide customers with a superior experience. Jim, back to you.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Okay, so the next two risk factors I'll be covering surface when you configure and make changes to EDI integrations. Sometimes trading partners impose deadlines on delivery of EDI integrations and changes as a condition for new business. And even when those agreements are verbal, missing deadlines can lead to partner dissatisfaction and sometimes lost business. Now, in some cases, delays are caused by dependencies on low-level programming tools and skills, as illustrated by the diagram on the right. And programming and other forms of sort of ground-up manual specification are the least productive approaches for EDI onboarding and provisioning, and they're also the most error-prone. But delays can be reduced by reusing and modifying previously created EDI processes, maps, interfaces, and other deliverables. The most common example of that is map reuse, but business processes, adapters, and other objects can also be reused. So here's how the process works. Most of you, again, are probably familiar with this. The first requirement is that base objects be available for reuse, and ideally these are objects that you have created previously that are similar to the new ones that you need for a new case. But base objects may also be supplied by vendors in the form of things like map libraries. Second, once you have a base object, then you copy it and you modify it to suit the new requirement. And then you repeat that process with the remaining objects needed for the complete implementation that you're looking to build. Locating a base object, copying it, modifying it until you have all the objects that you need to provision. And then finally, you test the resulting configuration until it produces correct results and deploy it to the EDI production environment, or probably test environment first. Now, there are two main disadvantages to this approach that can impact completion deadlines. The first is that object-level reuse can be slow and error-prone. Depending on the complexity of the EDI processes that you need to build, you might need to separately configure and connect dozens of objects in order to attain the desired behavior. And the second disadvantage is that correctly configuring different kinds of objects, maps, business processes, adapters, and so on, requires an understanding of each object type and the tools that you need to use to configure them. And those skills are necessary when an object is first created, but they might not be available at reuse time. Object-level integration is so ingrained as a best practice that EDI practitioners continue to rely on it despite the risk of missed deadlines, penalties, and lost businesses. And there are better ways. So let's move on and take a look at how we can improve on object-level reuse. All right, so you probably noticed that project reuse appears at the top of the diagram on the previous slide, and as you see on the right, as the most productive EDI provisioning option. And here's how project reuse works. Again, you start by locating a base for reuse, but in this case, that base is a configured project containing all of the objects needed to produce something like the result that you're looking for. For example, if you need to onboard a new customer, you might start with a project that contains an EDI order process, an advanced ship notice process, and an invoicing process. And if you don't already have those processes, again, your vendor might be able to supply them as a starting point. The next step is to supply modification inputs to some kind of project generation process. Project generation inputs can be derived, by the way, from enveloped EDI data examples as one example, and also other inputs supplied by the user like tables of partner profile data. What results from this process is a new project comprised of connected business processes, maps, adapters, and other objects, many of which are configured during the generation process, but maybe not all. If the partner to be onboarded requires specific process or mapping behavior, the user might configure those changes separately as a subsequent step. The final step, again, is to test and deploy the completed project. Now, project-level reuse is superior to object reuse because, first of all, you reuse complete running projects, tested projects, that retain their original object configurations. And objects are also configured by an automated process that understand what needs to change. And that means the user can engage in reuse at a higher level with fewer opportunities to introduce errors that extend testing time. So things like connection parameters, routing rules, naming of objects. There are all sorts of small details that can be automated because they're predictable based on partner profile data. So because of those advantages, object-level reuse, because of these advantages, project-level reuse lowers the risk of missing delivery deadlines and consistently produces higher quality results because the bases for reuse are complete tested integrations. And that leads to increased trading partner satisfaction. So project-level reuse is a new best practice for mitigating compliance risks when onboarding new partners and provisioning new integrations. So let's now take a look at risk factors that surface when you may need to make changes in existing provision. Okay, so as changes occur over time to trading partner connections, application interfaces, mapping logic, document versions, and other integration requirements, corresponding changes need to be introduced to your EDI integrations. And poor change control not only puts deadlines at risk, it also jeopardizes or can jeopardize the continuity of EDI operations. Let's start with versioning. Unversioned changes pose a risk because changing project objects without preserving the originals makes it difficult to restore the system to a known working state when changes need to be reversed. A second risk factor occurs when multiple users are allowed to change shared objects in an unmanaged fashion. This practice is risky because changes from one user can overlay changes made by another, and because mixing changes in an unmanaged fashion between two or more users can produce unexpected side effects. A third risk is allowing changes to be made by unauthorized users, either by unknown users or by known users who don't have the permission to make those changes. And a related risk factor, by the way, is failing to track who is making changes to the system. And a fourth change control risk factor is not having the ability to quickly undeploy changes that were made in error or that were made and subsequently found to be in error, and restore working integrations. And the main risk in this case is the loss of service availability for the affected integrations while changes are being reversed. And the cost of unmanaged change control, including untraceable changes, sometimes unrecoverable work, service interruptions, and possibly lost business. So they can be quite high. And because change control is difficult to monitor externally, it's especially important to understand service provider practices before you outsource EDI to a third party. So all of the service level risks I just described, again, are well understood, but what counts is whether they're under control. So let's move ahead and look at some best practices for managing these risks. Okay, again, the mitigating measures for the risks I just described are pretty straightforward. The risk of losing prior work when objects change is mitigated by implementing version control. And there are a number of open source and commercial repository managers that offer highly effective versioning solutions. And the risk of unmanaged multi-user updates to shared objects is, again, version control combined with change synchronization and change merging support. And again, leading repository managers also provide excellent support for these functions. So addressing the first two risk factors is simply a matter of integrating versioning and change management with your EDI design time environment. Imposing access controls that govern who's permitted to change and deploy integrations is the answer to unauthorized changes, along with logging of change events and change details. And finally, undeploy and redeploy functions in some form mitigate the risk of long service outages for integrations that are found to contain errors. These mitigation measures are complementary. So When used together, they greatly reduce the risk of lost work and untraceable changes and integration-level service outages that can disrupt business operations. So that pretty much wraps up our review of risk factors that affect new provisioning and provisioning changes. So let me hand the floor back over to Jeff, who's going to take us through some important system-level risk factors. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. One of the key factors for SLA compliance that we need to pay attention to is overall workload capacity of our systems. How systems do or don't scale with demand will affect our ability to meet our SLAs. For example, in our diagram here, we show a linear increase in demand over time, but a static or flat line capacity. At the left side of the graph, capacity far exceeds demand, but over time, as demand increases, longer processing windows for existing documents become evident. Additionally, slower response times are manifested by decreasingly available capacity. When demand finally exceeds capacity, transactions will be delayed, and we may begin to put our SLAs in jeopardy. Whether in a micro or macro scale, as demand continues to exceed capacity, transactions can be lost, negatively affecting those critical scorecards. Depending on the season, frequency, or other factors in the market, it may lead to lost business opportunities. Through unpredictable throughput and responses, unmanaged workload capacity leads to bottlenecks and can actually choke the broader supply chain. Managed capacity, on the other hand, ensures that systems are dynamically scalable with demand. Scalable systems have the ability to add resources as demand increases, and as capacity of a processing node is reached, additional nodes can be brought online without disruption. As business grows, demand for capacity grows. Over time, as the ability to handle increasing volumes is established, strategic value and services to the supply chain is also established. And strategic value and services growth through increasing demand can lead to larger market share. The ability to add capacity proactively ensures SLAs are not jeopardized through predictable throughput and response times. Extra or scalable on-demand capacity ensures that a spike in volume will not impact normal business. So whether the spike is a fluke, an error, or caused by disruptions elsewhere in the supply chain, managed workload capacity ensures that you will have the resources available to deal with those things as they come through. On a more of a micro scale, how the overall workload is segmented and prioritized greatly affects SLA compliance concerns. SLAs are put in risk when all work inputs get identical priority and when all workloads are assigned identical resources. Bottlenecks are created for high priority and or high volume document types, but low priority and low volume documents continue to fly through the system with ease. So for example, on the supply side, where orders are king, and system resources and prioritization need to be aligned to reflect that. If resources and workload prioritization are not aligned to your business goals, high priority work can be lost or not completed in time to meet SLA requirements. Additionally, multiple systems or oversized systems may be required to complete the work in the required time frames. In order to meet SLA compliance concerns, we need to align infrastructure to match desired business goals and priorities. If orders are king, like in our supply side example, we need to align resources and priorities to reflect that. If a key trading partner provides 5 or 10 or even more percentage of our overall business, we need to align our resources to match. It's also important to recognize that priorities and workloads change over time. This can be defined at a macro level, like document types or trading partners, or at a micro level, such as seasonal peaks or external disruptions that may occasionally flood systems with large volumes of documents. Based on input trends and analysis of document patterns, priorities can be identified and need to be tunable as circumstances change. Those same trends and patterns can be used to make decisions about how and where to allocate the right amount of resources to a particular workload. Although analysis and trends can properly help us plan and design for SLA compliance, exceptional circumstances occur that need quick reactive responses. These temporarily change priorities and resource allocation. In those cases, being able to dynamically reprioritize or allocate resources to trouble spots is key to ensuring your systems are doing their part to maintain SLA compliance. Aligning workload priorities and system resources with business goals lowers the risk of lost business and ensures a timely and predictable completion of high-priority work. Combined with scaling for future workload capacity and prioritization of workload requirements, services that bring documents into and take them out of your systems must be highly available to meet SLA compliance requirements. Single-node architectures, or those systems that don't provide any seamless failover or redundancy, elevate the risk of unmet SLA compliance. When a service outage occurs, the ability to receive or send transactions is broken, cutting off critical communications to and from trading partners. Obviously, this is a loss of transaction throughput. And with single instances, you may lose any work that was queued. In addition, there is no ability to receive new work. With a break in the action, you not only have to scramble to bring resources up as quickly as possible, you also have to try to figure out what was in process, restart it, and possibly fix distributed transactions across multiple systems. When disruptions to service availability occur, you risk being unresponsive to partner inputs, loss of unprocessed transactions, delaying high-priority work, and ultimately, a loss of business. In multi-node architectures that have some level of redundancy with simple failover or restart capabilities, and you have an outage or service outage, you continue to provide communication services to your partners through automated failover. This gives gains in service availability, but depending on the capabilities of your EDI middleware or lack thereof, can result in a loss of queued work. When this occurs, you begin the process of cleaning up in-flight transactions that may need to be backed out and reprocessed. Additionally, queuing of new work may get tricky as sequential transactions may be out of order, leading to ripples of business dysfunction. For example, order changes may arrive for orders, and those orders were victims of the most recent failure, which means they didn't process. At that point, neither the original order nor the changes are handled. Simple failover and multi-node redundancy may provide gains in service availability, but can result in loss of unprocessed transactions and potentially a loss of business. In multi-node architectures, though, where service redundancy, queue management failover, and fault adapting workload processing are deployed, you can achieve the levels of service availability needed to guarantee your SLAs. When node failure occurs, services remain available. Unprocessed transactions are visible to failover nodes, and processing continues. In the case where a workload processing node fails, work is distributed to the remaining active nodes to ensure process continuity. The combination of redundancy, queue failover, and fault-tolerant work nodes provides continuous service availability, preservation of queued work, and continuous queuing of new work. Now, in terms of SLA benefits, partner inputs will continuously be accepted and responded to. Recovery and restoration of queue work is automatic, and business continues unabated without disruption to downstream processes. Jim, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Before we wrap up and move on to your questions, we'd like to ask you one more poll question, so let's push that out. And here it is. So which of the following are your biggest SLA compliance problems or concerns? So what we've done here is really sort of recap the risk areas that Jeff and I have covered in the last 50 minutes or so. So please, again, answer, check off as many of these that apply to your situation, representing the risk factors that are the biggest areas of concern or problem areas in your business. And we'll give you about 20 seconds to answer here. And while you're answering, let me just put one more plug in for questions for a Q&A session. So if you have a question you'd like us, Jeff or me, to answer, please just type it into the meeting console, and we'll be glad to address it then. Maybe just 10 more seconds here. Okay, let's see. Oh, that's interesting. All right, let's see what kinds of results we got. All right, so going from the highest to lowest here, I'm going to scroll this a little bit. There we go. Looks like tied for the top are timely diagnosis and resolution of exceptions and managing acknowledgements and responses. Yeah, not surprising. Those can be tricky areas. And then data accuracy and completeness right behind those. Next highest are maintaining high service availability. So that's the issue Jeff just completed. And let me just go to the bottom. Minimizing process latency and manual interventions was the area of least concern. Again, that's not surprising because that tends to be highly industry specific. There are some businesses where process latency is a big concern and others where it's not so much. So interesting results. Okay, let me move on to the wrap up, and then I'll hand it back over to Russell for the Q&A session. So here are 4 key takeaways we'd like to suggest from this discussion. I've mentioned the first point several times, but it bears repeating. A service level compliance plan is really essential for everyone, including businesses that choose to outsource EDI, and that plan should identify, among other things, SLA requirements and risks. It should identify acceptable mitigation measures, maybe even identify unacceptable mitigation measures if there's some that you don't want to use. And also it should include oversight and reporting to verify adherence to the plan. The second takeaway is a recommendation to think broadly about service level compliance. So service level agreements define expected results, but they don't identify all of the possible ways to fail to meet compliance. So practically every EDI provisioning and operations process has some potential to threaten service levels. So it's important to perform a thorough audit of risk factors and include those in your compliance plan. The third point refers to the old saw that you can't manage what you don't measure. No business achieves perfect service level compliance 100% of the time, so it's important to track compliance levels and service level violations over time as a basis for measuring performance and progress. And it sounds like a good number of you in the audience today have a great handle on that, so again, that's encouraging. You know, even a small drop in compliance levels can signal the presence of a process that needs fixing. And finally, the final takeaway is about compliance automation. One of the most effective ways to reduce compliance risk is to identify manual compliance dependencies and replace them over time with automated processes. Jeff and I have mentioned a number of examples of that idea during this presentation. Automated error notifications, for example, self-serve visibility, automated failover and recovery, just to name a few. Automation isn't just faster, it's also more reliable, and that translates to higher service levels and more time for skilled personnel to focus on high-value activities. That pretty much wraps up our prepared material, so Russell, let me turn the floor back to you to moderate the Q&A session.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jeff. In the few minutes that we have left, we want to get to as many questions as we can. Just want to remind you, continue sending in your questions right now. Any that we don't get to on air will be answered offline. I just got to tell you, the detail that we had today, the drill down, absolutely worth it. All right, Jim, this one is for you. Questioner says, you mentioned how important it is for companies that outsource EDI to understand how providers meet SLA requirements. Here's the question. It's a very practical one, too. How important is it to put that understanding in writing in the service agreement? And it's really a two-part question, because then they say, well, how should we handle SLA requirements that surface after the agreement is signed? What do you say, Jim?
Well, I recommend that you first of all share your written compliance plan with your provider, if possible before you sign your service agreement, and include it as part of the written agreement terms. And a good service provider is going to welcome that kind of information up front because it sets clear performance expectations. As far as the second question is concerned, SLA requirements that surface after the agreement is signed, the best option is to pre-negotiate conditional terms that allow the plan to be updated and also enable the provider to cover the costs of additional requirements. Reaching agreement on those kinds of terms are going to be limited, frankly, to the provider's capabilities and resources, obviously. For example, their infrastructure might not be capable of guaranteeing the performance levels, throughput levels, response levels that you need. And the options at that point are to find another provider, at least for the new requirements.
All right. Now, here's one. It's not directed to either one of you in particular, so I'm just going to throw it out there. Questioner says, for an SMB without EDI, homegrown ERP, Excel-based MRP, and equally unsophisticated or EDI-capable trading partners, etc. Well, what documentation do you have for bringing EDI online? So who wants that one?
Jim,
Jeff, let me take a quick stab. Sorry?
I was going to say, Jim, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. I'll take an initial stab. Maybe you can add to what I'm thinking about here. But all right. So first of all, homegrown ERP. That means you're not going to find a solution, an EDI solution, off the shelf, right? You need some way to integrate with it using tools provided by either a EDI service provider or the EDI middleware provider. The interesting part, though, is the unsophisticated trading partners who are not EDI capable. That's a very common situation, by the way, and one that we run into quite often. EDI doesn't necessarily mean that you're talking about sending and receiving standard EDI messages. You could equally use flat files or spreadsheets, for example, which are easy for Office products like Microsoft Office to consume and produce. And in terms of communicating with the partners, you can use common transports like email and FTP. Again, they don't need to be fancy. So the thing to do is, I'd say two things. One is to look for a solution that has the ability to adapt to the capabilities of your trading partner. That's number one. And number two is, if you in your own business don't want to deal with EDI, then you might want to look for a service provider solution. Have somebody come in and maybe build the system out for you, at least the initial implementation. And if you don't want to manage it over time, also take on the job of managing it. But that's my take, Jeff.
Yeah, I think
Jeff, here's one that is directed to you. Oh, I'm sorry, were you going to answer that question?
No, I thought Jim did a wonderful job with that one.
All right, here's one for you that deals with load tender responses. Questioner says, our business depends on generating load tender responses within a very short window. So what best practices can we employ to ensure that we meet that response time requirement? Well, what would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we get that one quite frequently. A lot of it depends on your ERP and what you're using as far as sort of the interface between your EDI systems and your ERP. Typically, since responses need to get out quickly to satisfy those short windows, some vendors have requirements that are within minutes. Certainly, you can move to a more event-based approach or a small batch-based approach. So in other words, sometimes what we see is large batches of responses getting dumped out to be picked up by the EDI system, and then those are processed en masse and moved out. Certainly one of the things you can do is move more towards a much smaller batch, have things either issued through events, onesie-twosie kind of thing, so that as soon as the response is ready in your ERP, your EDI system is notified immediately, and that response gets out as quickly as possible. And certainly, as responses are key to accepting the orders, you want to make sure that you're allocating sufficient priority and resources to those. So certainly you want to make those processes high priority in your EDI system, and you want to make sure that you equip those systems or those processes to have significant or an appropriate amount of resources to deal with it. So move to smaller batches, assign high priority to those processes in your EDI system, and then give them the resources they need to do the job.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks to both of you. It's been some powerful, powerful stuff here, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it here. Quite a number of questions left. The experts will get to them offline and will answer them for you. All right. Well, listen, at this point, I would like to thank Jim O'Leary and Jeff Enns of EXTOL International for their time and for their information. I just want to thank everybody for attending as well. This is going to have to conclude our presentation this time. Till next time, then, Russell Goodman, Supply Chain Brain. So long.